The last volley of musket fire echoed across the hills. Then silence fell as though the world itself had paused to catch its breath. Eliza Whitlow stood at the edge of the hedgerow, her breath clouding in the frigid night air, hands clutching the handle of her water pail so tightly that her knuckles glowed pale. For a moment, she thought it was only the echoes that lingered, until a figure stirred in the snow-dusted ditch below. At first she froze, her heart hammering. The dark shape sprawled awkwardly, one leg bent beneath him, his coat smeared with mud and blood. She almost turned away, remembering every whispered warning. Stay out of soldiers' business, feeble girl. You'll be crushed like a twig between cart wheels. But then the man groaned, a raw, human sound that cut through her fear. The pail slipped from her hands, water spilling and steaming against the frozen ground as she stumbled forward. "Sir!" Her voice cracked, thin as the icy wind. She crouched, brushing back a tangle of hair that had frozen against his cheek. His face was pale beneath grime and blood, jaw unshaven, lips bluish. A Patriot officer's coat, blue, though nearly unrecognizable under mud, clung to his frame. One sleeve was torn, exposing a deep gash that still seeped through a crude bandage. His hand clutched something against his chest, a waxed packet pressed so tightly that she thought it might fuse with his skin. His eyelids fluttered. "Don't let them find this." The words rasped, barely more than vapor. Then his head lolled. Eliza's throat tightened. She was no nurse, no fighter, yet she had seen wounds before, neighbors dragged home from skirmishes, boys with shattered limbs. She pressed her palms to his arm, feeling the hot surge of blood that soaked through the cloth. He needed care quickly, but the bell in the village had already rung curfew. Lantern light would soon sweep the lanes as patrols searched barns and hedges for deserters. If they found him here, both he and anyone with him would be doomed. Her mind spun. Every sensible voice told her to step back, to let him be someone else's burden. But another voice, quieter, stubborn, rose above them. "If you leave him, you'll carry that weight forever." Teeth clenched, she hooked her arms beneath his shoulders and heaved. He was heavier than a sack of flour, his limp body dragging her down into the snow. She staggered, nearly collapsing, then planted her boots and leaned back with all her weight. Inch by inch, she pulled him toward the barn, her breath burning in her lungs, sweat chilling instantly against her neck. Inside, the air was thick with hay and old wood. She half dragged, half rolled him onto a bed of straw, then snatched a lantern from the peg. Its glow revealed the full state of him. A musket ball wound near the shoulder, hastily wrapped, bruises across his ribs, mud caked into every seam of his coat. His packet lay between them, bound with twine, stamped with a blurred seal. She resisted the urge to untie it. Whatever it held, he had nearly died to protect it. Her hands shook as she tore strips from her apron, pressing them against the wound. He winced but did not wake. She remembered her father's notes from his apothecary trade. Pressure, always pressure, and leaned hard until the bleeding slowed. Then she fumbled for the small pouch of dried willow bark she had carried since autumn, steeping a bitter decoction in a chipped tin cup with water from the hearth kettle. She pressed it to his lips, coaxing a swallow. A thin line of liquid slipped down his chin, but some passed his throat. Outside, the crunch of hooves in snow froze her blood. She dashed to the window slit, lanterns bobbing down the lane. Patrol. Her pulse roared in her ears. She doused the lantern and crouched beside the officer, pulling a wool blanket over him. The glow of torches flickered across the cracks in the barn wall. Closer, closer. A knock rattled the barn door. She clamped a hand over her mouth to smother the sound of her breathing. The officer stirred faintly, muttering, "Ford, at Hickory, countersign." The words trailed into incoherence. "Eliza!" A whisper hissed. Not a soldier's bark, May Carter's voice. Relief swept through her so sharply it almost unsteadied her. She slipped to the door and cracked it just wide enough to admit the herbalist, who darted inside and shut it fast. May's eyes widened at the sight of the officer. "Lord help us, girl. You've taken in a wounded patriot." Her tone was sharp but not unkind. She bent, examining the bandage with quick, efficient fingers. "If Harwood's men catch him here, you'll hang for it." "I couldn't leave him," Eliza whispered. "He'll die before dawn." May's lips pressed thin. "Then we must move him. The dragnet tightens tonight. Harwood himself is leading it. They'll search every loft and hayrick. If we can get him to the river, there's a picket of our own across the ford. But it's miles in the dark, and he won't walk." Eliza's stomach sank. Her arms already ached from dragging him here. "Then we carry him." May's gaze lingered, measuring her. 4 years the village had called Eliza frail. Her small frame, her quiet voice, her inability to keep pace with other women at harvest. May seemed to weigh those judgments against the girl's firelit eyes now. Last she nodded. "Then we carry him." They lashed together a crude sledge from old planks and a broken door, rolling the officer atop it with groans muffled in his throat. Outside, the patrol's voices drifted faint on the wind, moving down another lane. Eliza and May heaved the sledge into motion, the wood rasping against the frozen ruts. As they edged from the barn into the cutting night air, Eliza cast one last glance at the dim glow of her cottage window. Warmth, safety, all abandoned. Ahead stretched a night of peril, every step weighted with the man's life, and perhaps their own. The officer moaned again, clutching blindly at the packet. Eliza tightened her grip on the rope, eyes on the shadowed road. Whatever lay in that bundle, whatever fate awaited across the river, she knew only one thing for certain. She would not let him die here in the dark. The rope bit into Eliza's palms as she hauled the sledge forward, each step a battle against the crusted snow. The wooden planks scraped and groaned, threatening to betray them with every jerk. Beside her, May leaned into the task with the steady strength of a woman used to fieldwork and long nights at berths. Their breaths plumed white in the frigid air, vanishing quickly into the blackness above. Behind them, the barn and cottage disappeared into shadow. Ahead, only the skeletal silhouettes of leafless orchards stretched beneath a star-pierced sky. The moon was half-shrouded by drifting clouds, its pale light sometimes blessing them with visibility, other times abandoning them to blind groping. Somewhere to the east, a dog barked and a lantern bobbed, reminding them that patrols were never far. The officer on the sledge stirred. His voice was hoarse, words barely formed. "Hickory Ford, dawn, countersign." He coughed, the sound harsh against the quiet, and his hand trembled toward the packet bound to his chest. May crouched briefly to adjust the blanket around him, murmuring, "Hush now, Captain, keep your strength." When she rose, her face was tight with worry. "He burns with fever. We must move faster." Eliza nodded, though her arms trembled with fatigue. Each time the sledge caught on a rut or snagged against frozen earth, she thought of dropping the rope, of collapsing where she stood. But she pressed on, repeating silently, "He will not die here, not while I can walk." They skirted the main road, keeping to cattle paths lined with low stone walls. In the distance, the bell of a watchtower clanged once, twice. Lanterns flared as a squad of men moved between houses. Eliza pressed herself flat against the wall, heart hammering, dragging the sledge close behind. The officer's breath rasped so loudly she feared it would carry. May slipped her hand over his mouth, whispering softly until the patrol passed. Only when the last lantern disappeared did they dare move again. As they pushed on, the weather turned. A fine sleet began to fall, stinging their faces, slicking the ground to treachery. Eliza's skirts were soaked to her knees, her boots squelching with each step. She stumbled more than once, barely catching herself before crashing to the ground. At one stumble the sledge lurched sideways, nearly tipping the officer into the mud. May caught it, but her grunt of effort betrayed her fatigue. They paused beneath the black outline of a mill house. The wheel creaked faintly in the wind, ice forming on its paddles. May pressed a hand to her back, panting. "If we keep to the road, Harwood's men will see us. We must cut through the orchard down to the creek. From there, Hickory Ford lies a mile on." Eliza swallowed hard. Through the orchard, then. She bent again to the rope, ignoring the ache in her shoulders. The orchard stretched like a graveyard of twisted arms, branches clattering softly under the weight of sleet. They wove between the rows, the sledge bumping over roots and furrows. Twice, the bark of a farm dog sent Eliza's pulse surging, but the animals were penned and did not give chase. Beyond the orchard, the creek's dark ribbon reflected the faint light of the sky. By the time they reached its bank, Eliza's breath tore from her lungs in ragged gasps. She wiped her sleeve across her forehead, though the sleet had already plastered her hair to her temples. May crouched beside the officer, pressing fingers to his pulse. Weak, too weak. She rummaged in her satchel, producing a small vial of spirits. Tilting his head, she trickled a measure past his lips. He coughed, choking, but swallowed. A flicker of awareness crossed his eyes. Eliza knelt beside him. "Captain Reed, can you hear me?" she asked softly. His gaze, glazed though it was, found hers for a moment. "Countersign," he murmured again. "Ashfield, reply." Then his eyes fluttered shut. May frowned. "Ashfield. Remember it. If the men at the ford are ours, they'll answer with that. If they do not—" She let the silence finish the thought. Enemy hands meant death. They rested only a minute before pressing on. The creek path narrowed, bordered by brambles. The sledge scraped and jolted, once nearly tumbling into the water. At the sharpest bend they heard voices, a pair of soldiers, muskets slung, lantern between them. Eliza's blood froze. She and May dragged the sledge into the shadows of a bramble thicket, crouching low as the soldiers approached. "Reed's men scattered north," one was saying. "Harwood swears some of 'em crawl through these farms. Orders are to flush every barn." The other spat into the snow. "This damned weather'll do the work for us. No man bleeds long in sleet like this." Their laughter was cruel, casual. The lantern swung past, its glow illuminating the brambles just enough that Eliza was certain they'd be seen. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, willing herself still. But the soldiers walked on, their voices fading. Only when silence returned did May tug her sleeve. "We move." At last, the creek curved into a low meadow. Beyond it, the river gleamed faintly, swollen from snowmelt, current swift. The ford lay somewhere ahead, but the banks looked treacherous, the water deeper than she had imagined. The thought of dragging the sledge through made her chest tighten. May crouched, scanning the far bank. A faint glow pulsed there, lanterns. Figures moved, their shapes distorted by mist. One called across the water, voice sharp. "Halt! Who goes?" May whispered urgently. "The countersign, quick, girl." Eliza licked her lips, heart racing. She called, her voice barely carrying above the rush of water. "Hickory." The figures paused. Then one called back, but the word was wrong. "Elm." Not Ashfield. The wrong reply. Eliza's breath caught. May's eyes widened in the gloom. "That's not it," she hissed. "Those aren't our men." The lantern on the far bank swayed, then lifted higher. The figure raised a musket. "Bring him over," the voice shouted. "Now!" Eliza's knees weakened. If she obeyed, they'd lose him, and whatever message he carried. If she refused, a shot might cut them down here at the water's edge. Behind them, faint on the wind, came the sound of hoofbeats, patrols closing in. Trapped between river and road, enemy ahead and pursuers behind, Eliza gripped the rope tighter, her breath shallow. Captain Reed stirred again, whispering fevered nonsense, the packet still clutched against his chest. The sleet thickened, cloaking them in a shifting veil of silver. May's eyes met hers. "We must think quick, Eliza. One wrong word, and all is lost." The lantern on the opposite bank bobbed again, and a harsh voice repeated, "Bring him here." Eliza swallowed hard, her mind racing. Every muscle ached, every ounce of strength spent, but she knew the night was far from over. The river waited, the wrong countersign hanging in the air like a death sentence. The river roared louder in Eliza's ears than the pounding of her heart. The figures across the bank stood stiff, their lantern light spilling yellow across the churned water. Their musket barrels gleamed wet in the sleet. Again came the command. "Bring him over." At once. Eliza's throat tightened. The countersign had been wrong. Reed's delirious whisper had been clear. "Ashfield." The answer "Elm" was false, a signal that the men across the bank were no allies. She felt May's hand brush her sleeve. Firm warning. "If we step forward," May whispered, "we hand him straight to the king's men." The officer on the sledge stirred, fever-bright eyes flicking open. His cracked lips moved. "Not them," he breathed before sliding back into half-consciousness. Behind, hoofbeats echoed faintly against the frozen ground. The patrol was closing. The wrong men ahead. The only cover around them was the riverbank's thin bramble. Eliza's chest heaved, but she straightened her spine. "If we falter here, all is lost," she muttered, more to herself than to May. May's jaw set. She scanned the riverbank with quick, practiced eyes. Then she tugged Eliza's sleeve sharply, pointing downstream. In the half-moon glow, Eliza spotted it. A shallow braid in the river, a place where the current split around a gravel bar. The water swirled, less violent, and the bank dipped lower. A hidden ford, just beyond the enemy's lantern glow. "They don't see it," May whispered. "We go there." Quietly. Eliza nodded, every muscle tense. She gripped the rope again, and together they inched the sledge sideways, careful to muffle its scrape beneath the river's roar. Each step felt endless. Her boots sank into mud, sleet dripping down her neck. Across the water, the false soldiers shouted again, impatience in their tone. "Now, woman! Bring him!" Eliza forced herself not to look at them, not to betray her intent. Her breath came shallow, each movement calculated. The officer groaned faintly, shifting beneath the blanket. Eliza froze, praying the sound hadn't carried. The lantern across the river swung higher, the men leaning forward as if straining to hear. Then, salvation. A gust of wind cut across the river, shaking branches, scattering sleet. The men cursed at the cold, momentarily distracted. Eliza seized the chance. "Now," she hissed. She and May heaved, dragging the sledge down toward the hidden ford. The ground grew slick beneath their boots, gravel shifting, water foaming white as they entered the current. Eliza gasped at the shock. The river was colder than she had imagined, biting through leather and wool alike. It stole her breath, numbed her legs. The sledge jolted as water surged around it, threatening to tear it away. She gritted her teeth and leaned into the rope, muscles screaming. Captain Reed groaned, his fever-wild eyes opening once more. He thrashed weakly, nearly rolling from the sledge into the current. Eliza lunged, clutching him with one hand while clinging to the rope with the other. "Hold still," she begged, but he only muttered fevered fragments. "Orders. Saratoga, must reach." The current pulled hard. Eliza's boots slid. Her arms burned. She thought for one terrible instant that she would be swept away. Then May was beside her, bracing the sledge, teeth gritted. "Keep steady. Just a few more yards." The roar of the river drowned all else, until a musket shot cracked from upstream. A plume of water leapt near them, the ball striking inches from the sledge. The false soldiers had seen them. Lanterns bobbed frantically on the far bank as shouts rose. Another shot rang closer. "Eliza!" May shouted. "Pull!" Together they strained, boots slipping on submerged stones. Eliza's shoulders felt as if they would tear from their sockets. But at last, the water shallowed. Gravel crunched beneath her boots. With a final desperate heave, they hauled the sledge onto the far bank, collapsing beside it, soaked and gasping. May dragged Reed higher up the bank, away from the waterline. "He's fading," she muttered, pressing her hand to his clammy forehead. "We must move." Before she could finish, the crack of a musket split the air again. May jerked, then fell to her knees with a strangled cry. Eliza's heart froze. A dark stain spread across May's sleeve, just above the elbow. Not a mortal wound, but blood ran freely. "Go," May hissed, teeth clenched. "Take him. Don't stop now." Eliza's breath caught. "I won't leave you." May gripped her good arm hard, eyes blazing. "Listen to me, girl. Pack it. That's what they want. If they take it, every man at Saratoga dies for nothing. You must carry him, with or without me." Eliza's hands trembled, torn between fear and resolve. She could not imagine leaving May, yet the weight of the packet was undeniable. Every instinct screamed that the night's fate rested in her choice. Another musket shot cracked, this one closer, bark splintering from a nearby tree. Eliza looked up. The false soldiers were scrambling to find a crossing upstream. Worse, the pounding of hoofbeats now thundered from behind. Sergeant Harwood's patrol was arriving, silhouettes of riders appearing along the ridge. They were trapped again, until a whistle pierced the trees ahead. 3 notes, sharp and deliberate. Eliza stiffened. Whistles meant signals. But whose? The horsemen drew nearer, shouting orders. Across the river, the false soldiers had nearly reached the ford. Eliza's pulse raced, torn between terror and hope. She clutched the rope of the sledge, then seized the packet itself, holding it high against the dim light. "Stay back!" she shouted into the night, voice stronger than she had ever thought possible. "One step closer and I burn it where I stand." The soldiers on the far bank faltered, shouts overlapping. Harwood's horse reared at the sound. The whistle came again, 3 notes, then silence. Eliza swallowed hard. She had no musket, no blade, nothing but her words and her resolve. Yet for the first time, she saw hesitation flicker among the men who pursued. And in that heartbeat of uncertainty, she planted her boots and stood tall, the feeble girl no more. The night held its breath, as though waiting for the next move. The night seemed to pause. The whistle still echoed faintly among the trees, and Eliza stood rigid on the riverbank, the officer's packet clutched high as though it were a torch against the darkness. Her soaked skirts clung to her legs, her breath misted in ragged clouds, and her arms trembled, not from weakness now, but from sheer defiance. Sergeant Harwood reined his horse on the ridge, the animal's breath steaming in the cold air. Lantern light revealed the sneer on his scarred face. "Girl," he called, his voice rough and deliberate. "You've no business with that man or what he carries. Hand him over, and I'll see you left in peace. Refuse, and I'll burn your cottage to cinders before the sun rises." Eliza's grip tightened on the packet. Behind her, May knelt, pressing a strip of linen tight against her bleeding arm. The wounded officer stirred weakly on the sledge, fever still clouding his mind. Eliza felt the weight of them both pressing down upon her shoulders, 2 lives and perhaps many more, resting on the choice of a single woman. "I will not," she answered, surprising herself with the steadiness of her tone. "Not to you, nor to your false soldiers across the water. This belongs to the men who fight for our liberty, not for the king's coin." Harwood's laugh was cold, cruel. A slip of a girl wagging her tongue about liberty. "You'll be dust in a ditch before dawn." He motioned to his men, riders tightening their grips on reins and muskets. Then, from the tree-line behind Eliza, came an answering call. "Ashfield." The word cut across the night like a blade. Eliza spun toward it. Shapes emerged from the shadows, men in tattered continental coats, muskets at the ready, bayonets glinting faintly. Their leader, a lean sergeant with a bandaged jaw, stepped forward. "Countersign," he barked. Eliza's heart leapt. She turned back toward the riverbank and shouted with all her might. "Hickory." The leader gave a sharp nod. "She's one of ours. Form line." In an instant, a half-dozen muskets leveled from the tree-line. The false soldiers across the river faltered, their lanterns wavering. Harwood cursed, jerking his reins. "Fall back," he snarled to his men. "The night's theirs, but it won't last." With a final glare at Eliza, he wheeled his horse and vanished into the dark, his patrol scattering with him. The figures on the opposite bank vanished just as swiftly, melting into shadow once they realized they had been outflanked. Silence fell again, broken only by the rasp of the river and the labored breaths of the wounded. Eliza nearly collapsed with relief. Her legs buckled, and she caught herself on the rope of the sledge. The packet trembled in her hands, but she did not release it until the Continental sergeant approached, hand extended. "You've done a dangerous thing, miss," he said gruffly. His eyes flicked to the officer on the sledge. "Captain Reed. By heaven, we thought him lost." He dropped to his knees beside the man, checking his pulse and muttering a quick prayer. "The packet, does he still have it?" Eliza offered it wordlessly, her fingers reluctant to let go. The sergeant handled it as though it were made of glass, tucking it safely beneath his coat. Then he looked up at her again, his expression shifting from suspicion to something close to awe. "You carried him through this night." "With May's help," Eliza whispered, glancing at her friend. May gave a weary nod, still pressing her wound, her face pale but resolute. The sergeant's voice softened. "Many men will live because you did not falter. His orders will see to it." He signaled to his men. "Lift him. We'll get him to the surgeons at camp. And see to these women. Wrap that arm before she bleeds out." 2 soldiers hurried to May, binding her arm more securely. Another helped Eliza rise to her feet, though she nearly pulled away, unused to such attention. Her whole body trembled with the aftershock of strain and fear. Only now, with safety at hand, did she realize how badly her shoulders burned from the rope, how her palms were raw with blisters, how every step had worn her near to breaking. Dawn was breaking as they made their way from the river. The first light seeped across the horizon, pale gold painting the snow-crusted fields. Smoke rose faintly from distant cottages, and crows stirred in the hedgerows. The long, terrible night was ending. At the edge of the camp, surgeons bent over Captain Reed, murmuring as they examined his wound. He drifted in and out of consciousness, fevered but alive. When his eyes flicked open, they landed on Eliza. A faint smile touched his cracked lips. "You bore me through," he whispered. "Stronger than any rifle." Then he slipped again into fevered sleep. Eliza's cheeks burned, though not from the cold. She lowered her gaze, unsure how to answer such words. The sergeant approached again, offering her a folded scrap of parchment. "It's a letter of commendation. When this war is done, folks will know your name, not just as the frail girl from Whitlow's Lane, but as the woman who carried a captain through the night." Eliza's fingers closed over the parchment, though she scarcely believed it real. For years she had been nothing more than a shadow in her village. Too quiet, too weak, too small. Now she had endured a night that would be spoken of in mess tents and remembered in dispatches. May touched her uninjured arm gently. "See what comes of not listening to fools. Frail they called you. But I saw you stand taller than Harwood's horse tonight." Eliza gave a faint, weary laugh. "If I stood tall, it was only because I had no choice." "Then perhaps that is when true strength shows," May said softly. They walked back toward the small fire the soldiers had kindled, warming stiff hands and feet. Eliza stared into the flames, letting the heat sink slowly into her bones. Her eyes drifted to the horizon again. The sun had cleared the line of trees, spilling light across the fields, gilding every branch with a fragile radiance. For the first time she allowed herself to tremble. She looked down at her hands, raw, bruised, streaked with dried blood, and realized she had not felt the pain until now. The tears that welled in her eyes were not of weakness, but of release. She had carried him. She had carried herself. And in doing so, she had crossed more than the river. She had crossed the boundary of the life others had drawn for her. When the war ended, perhaps she would return to her cottage and her quiet chores. Or perhaps she would take the sergeant's offer, working with the field infirmaries, where her calm and courage could save lives. Whatever path she chose, she knew she would never again be bound by the word feeble. The world had weighed her, and she had borne the weight through the night. And with Dawn, she had proven herself more than anyone had ever believed.